The steam from the porcelain cup warmed his hands, but did nothing for the cold that lived in his bones. It was a permanent state, a chill that had set in a decade ago and never left. From his table in the corner of the Shinjuku Park Hyatt's top-floor restaurant, Ryo Ishikawa had a perfect view of Tokyo, a sprawling galaxy of light and life that felt as distant as the stars. He preferred it this way. Distance was safety. Silence was power. He was having tea alone. He was always alone. Then, the universe, with its cruel sense of humor, sent him chaos in the form of 3 identical little girls in light pink dresses. He had noticed them earlier, a vibrant disruption to the restaurant's muted elegance. They orbited a woman in a dark red dress, a slash of crimson against the cream and gold decor. She moved with a weary grace, her shoulders squared, her expression a careful balance of maternal patience and quiet exhaustion. Her hair was a cloud of intricate braids, and her skin was the color of rich, dark earth. She was beautiful, but it was her competence that held his attention. She managed her 3 small whirlwinds with a series of quiet words, a light touch on a shoulder, a look that conveyed a universe of meaning. He was admiring her control when it all fell apart. A man appeared at her table, a Westerner with a cheap suit and an expensive, desperate smile. Ryo's eyes, trained to assess threats in fractions of a second, dismissed him and then reassessed. The man wasn't a physical threat, but he was a social explosive, his presence a lit fuse. His voice was low, but it carried a whining insistence that made the hair on Ryo's arms stand up. The woman's posture went rigid, her calm fractured. That was when the girls acted. With a synchronicity that could only be born of a shared womb, they slid from their chairs. They moved not toward their mother, but toward him, toward the still, silent man in the corner. Ryo remained motionless as they approached, 3 small figures with wide, intelligent eyes. One of them, braver than the others, leaned in close, her hands planted on his table, right next to his untouched plate of sweets. She whispered, her voice a tiny, urgent thing. "Pretend you're our father." Ryo did not so much as blink. His gaze flickered from the child in front of him to her 2 identical sisters flanking her, then to the woman in red, whose face was now a mask of horror. The man, Marcus, had followed them, his greasy smile widening. "Look at that," Marcus sneered, his voice loud enough to turn heads. "Found yourselves a new daddy already? Lena, you always did trade up." Lena started moving toward them, her hands outstretched, a frantic apology already forming on her lips. "I am so sorry, sir. Girls, come back here right now. Chloe, Brianna, Olivia, I mean it." Ryo ignored her. He ignored Marcus. He looked down at the little girl, Chloe was it, who still had her hands on his table. Her eyes were pleading. In them, he saw not a child's game, but a calculated act of survival. A desperate gambit. He saw intelligence. He saw a mirror of the woman in red. He made a decision. It was not born of kindness or charity. It was an impulse, a flicker of something ancient and proprietary. He despised disruptions. This man was a disruption. Ryo finally moved his gaze from the child to the intruder. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. "Leave," he said. The word was not a request. It was an order, delivered with the flat, dead certainty of a blade striking bone. It hung in the air, colder than the refrigerated air conditioning. Marcus's smirk faltered. He looked at Ryo, truly looked at him for the first time, and whatever he saw there, the stillness, the ink crawling just above the stark white collar of his shirt, the absolute absence of fear in his eyes, made the blood drain from his face. He stammered, took a half step back, then turned and practically fled the restaurant. The silence he left behind was heavy, charged. Lena finally reached the table, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She began pulling her daughters back. "I am so sorry. I don't know what to say. They've never." Ryo cut her off, his voice still low, still dangerously calm. He looked at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You have brought trouble to my table," he said, the statement a simple, undeniable fact. "Now you will sit." Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits materialized behind Lena, their presence so sudden and silent it was as if they had stepped out of the shadows. One pulled out a chair for her. It was not a suggestion. Lena froze. Her daughters clustered around her legs like frightened chicks. The quiet elegance of the restaurant had vanished, replaced by an invisible cage of tension, and she and her children were trapped inside it with the man whose single word had been enough to make a predator run. She had come here for a rare, celebratory dinner with her girls. Now, she was a prisoner of the man they had chosen as their savior. She sat. She had no other choice. The world shrank to the size of the table. The ambient chatter of the restaurant, the clink of silverware, the distant piano music, it all faded into a dull roar. All Lena could focus on was the man across from her. He hadn't moved, but the air around him had changed. It was denser, heavier. His men stood like statues at the periphery, their presence a silent, unyielding fence. "Your name," he said. It wasn't a question. "Lena," she managed, her voice tight. "Lena Washington." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "I am Ishikawa Ryo," he said it simply, as if the name itself should be explanation enough. And perhaps in this city it was. She knew nothing of the Tokyo underworld, but she knew power when she saw it. It was in the cut of his suit, the unnerving stillness of his hands, the way the entire restaurant staff now gave their corner a wide, respectful berth. Her daughters, sensing the shift from immediate danger to a more complex, uncertain kind, were silent. They pressed against her, their small bodies trembling slightly. Olivia, the quietest of the three, buried her face in the fabric of Lena's dress. "The man," Ryo stated, his eyes fixed on hers. "He is a problem from your past." "I thought he was," Lena said, choosing her words with care. "He was someone I knew back in the States. I didn't know he was in Japan." The lie was thin, but it was all she had. Marcus wasn't just someone she knew. He was the reason she'd left Chicago, the reason she guarded her privacy with a fierce desperation. He was an obsession she couldn't shake. Ryo's gaze was penetrating, as if he could see the holes in her story. "Loose ends are untidy. They can wrap around things you wish to protect." His eyes flickered down to her children, then back to her. The implication was chillingly clear. A waiter appeared, silent and deferential, and placed 3 small bowls of strawberry ice cream in front of the girls. Lena hadn't ordered it. Ryo gave another minute nod, and the waiter vanished. The girls looked from the ice cream to their mother, seeking permission. Lena felt a surge of defiance. She would not let this man control every aspect of their lives, not even for a moment. But then she looked at his face, at the cold, calculating intelligence there, and understood. This wasn't about control. It was about observation. He was testing them, testing her. She gave her daughters a small, reassuring nod. "Go on," she whispered. As they picked up their spoons, Ryo leaned forward slightly. "You are an art curator," he said. Again, not a question. Lena's blood ran cold. "How did you know that?" "I make it my business to know things. Especially about people who bring trouble to my table." He gestured vaguely toward the windows. "You secured the new exhibit at the Mori, the one on Edo period woodblock prints." It was a difficult acquisition. She was an open book to him. Her carefully constructed life, her professional achievements, felt fragile and exposed under his analytical gaze. He knew who she was. What else did he know? "My men will take you home," he said, settling back in his chair, as if the matter was concluded. "That's not necessary," Lena said quickly, her independence flaring. "We can take a taxi." "It is not a request," his tone was flat, final. "The man who bothered you is a loose end. I do not like loose ends in my territory. Until he is no longer a problem, you and your children are under my protection." Protection. The word sounded like a sentence. The drive from the hotel was a silent, tense affair. Ryo's car was not a car, it was an armored vault on wheels. The windows were thick, tinted, and the silence inside was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. He sat beside the driver, a formidable man with a scar that bisected his eyebrow. Lena, and the girls were in the back. Rio didn't speak to them, but she could feel his awareness, his attention, like a physical weight. They did not go to her small apartment in Meguro. Instead, the car descended into a private underground garage beneath a sleek, anonymous skyscraper in Akasaka. When the doors opened, they were not in a home, but in a gilded cage. A penthouse apartment that took up the entire top floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking, terrifying view of the city he seemed to own. "You will be safe here," Rio announced, stepping into the cavernous living room. It was minimalist, decorated in shades of gray and black, with sharp lines and cold marble floors. It felt less like a home and more like a corporate headquarters or a modern art museum. An unlived-in space. Over the next few days, that impression only deepened. They were captives, treated with a strange, detached courtesy. Food appeared. Clothes in their sizes were delivered in expensive boxes. A tutor was arranged for the girls, but they could not leave. Rio was a fleeting presence, there one moment, gone the next. He moved through the apartment like a ghost, his silence more intimidating than any threat. It was during one of his absences that Chloe, ever the explorer, slipped into a room at the end of a long hallway. The door was ajar. It was a study, lined with books from floor to ceiling. On the heavy oak desk, amidst stacks of paper, was a single, small silver frame. Lena found her there, her small fingers tracing the edge of the frame. Inside was a photograph of a woman with a gentle smile and a little girl, no older than her own daughters, with bright, laughing eyes. They were standing under a cherry blossom tree, pink petals caught in their hair. "Who are they?" Chloe asked, her voice soft. Before Lena could answer, a voice came from the doorway, low and dangerous. "That does not concern you." Rio stood there, his face like a mask carved from ice. But his eyes, fixed on the photograph, held a flicker of something else. A deep, profound pain. He walked over, took the frame from Chloe's hand with a gentleness that was startling, and placed it back on the desk, face down. He looked at Lena, and for the first time the mask cracked. "She was my wife," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The girl was my daughter. They were killed. A message from a rival clan, meant for me." He paused, and the silence was filled with a decade of unspoken grief. "It was my fault. I was not careful enough. I brought the danger to them." That was his wound, the shame he carried, the reason for the cold, the silence, the distance. He had failed to protect the ones he loved, and he had spent the last 10 years building a fortress around his heart to ensure it never happened again. And now Lena and her 3 daughters were inside that fortress with him. She realized with a jolt that he wasn't protecting them from Marcus. He was protecting them from his own failure, trying to rewrite the past with her and her children as the subjects. The illusion of safety shattered a week later. They were in the armored car, on their way to a private park Rio owned, a concession he'd made after days of pleading from the girls. Lena was just starting to feel a sliver of normalcy when the world exploded in a screech of tires and the sickening crunch of metal. A black sedan slammed into them, trying to force them off the elevated highway. Rio's men reacted with brutal efficiency. The driver wrestled the wheel, keeping them steady. The man in the passenger seat was already on a phone, speaking in rapid, clipped Japanese. But another car appeared, boxing them in. The back window of the car in front of them lowered. A man with a gun. Instinct took over. Rio moved faster than she could have imagined. He threw himself over the back seat, covering her daughters with his own body, his expensive suit jacket forming a shield over their small, pink-clad forms. "Stay down," he roared, the command cracking like a whip. The side windows, supposedly bulletproof, spiderwebbed as shots rang out. Lena, pressed against the floor, had a clear view of the side door. In the chaos, as their driver rammed the car ahead, the back door on her side popped open a few inches. Freedom. She could grab one of the girls, maybe 2, and run. Disappear into the chaos of the stalled traffic. But then she looked at Rio. He was a wall of muscle and resolve, shielding her children without a second thought for his own safety. And in that moment, she saw not a monster, but a man desperately trying to atone for an old sin. Her choice was made. She didn't run. She scrambled for the heavy, car-issued fire extinguisher latch to the floor. It was heavy, awkward, but she ripped it from its moorings. As one of the attackers tried to wrench their door open, she swung it with all her might, smashing it into his head. He crumpled with a grunt. The momentary opening was all Rio's men needed. The firefight was short, brutal, and ended as quickly as it began. Back in the silent penthouse, the aftermath was a quiet storm. One of Rio's men had a superficial wound on his arm. The girls were shaken but unharmed, huddled on the sofa watching a movie, their resilience a constant source of amazement. Rio stood by the window, his back to her. When he finally turned, his face was grim. "You had a chance to leave," he said. "They are my children," she replied, her voice steady. "You were protecting them. I wasn't going to run and leave you to do it alone." He walked toward her then, his steps slow, deliberate. He stopped just before her, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently push a stray braid back from her face where it had come loose in the struggle. His fingers brushed her temple, a touch so light it was like the whisper of a ghost. But it sent a jolt of electricity through her. His eyes, dark and intense, held hers. The silence stretched, thick with everything they couldn't say. The violence they had shared, the fear, the strange and terrifying alliance that was forming between them. "You are not like anyone I have ever known, Lena Washington," he said, his voice a low rumble. And in that moment, she knew she was in more danger than she had ever been on that highway. The re-hook was a confession, not of love, but of consequence. Marcus was a pawn, Rio said later that night, his voice devoid of emotion as he stared out at the city lights. "He was paid by the Kudo clan, my rivals. They wanted to test my reactions to see if I had a new weakness. When you didn't run today, you gave them their answer." The blood drained from Lena's face. "So this is because of me." "This is because of me," he corrected, his jaw tight. "They believe you and your daughters are mine to protect. They will not stop. Not until they take something from me to settle an old score." His meaning was clear. They would try to take her, or her children. He was trying to protect them, but his protection was the very thing that had painted a target on their backs. The Kudo clan escalated. They were clever. They didn't launch another frontal assault. They found a seam in Rio's security network, the private tutor he'd hired for the girls. They'd gotten to her family, threatened them, turned her. A text message, a schedule change, a vulnerability created. Lena was the one who sensed it, a mother's intuition, a primal instinct that screamed wrongness. The tutor wanted to take the girls to a special cultural exhibit at a small, private museum. It wasn't on their approved schedule. Lena's polite refusal was met with an uncharacteristic insistence. She saw the flicker of panic in the tutor's eyes. She contacted Rio's head of security directly, bypassing the chain of command. Her message was simple: something is wrong. It was a trap. The Kudo clan was waiting. But because of Lena's warning, Rio's men were waiting for them. The confrontation happened not at the museum, but in the sterile underground garage of the tutor's apartment building. Lena and the girls were miles away, safe in the penthouse. But Rio was there. He showed her the security footage later. Not to frighten her, but to show her the truth of the world she now inhabited. It was clinical, brutal. One of the captured Kudo men was brought to a warehouse. Rio asked him questions. The man spat at him. "Leave us," Rio said to his men. He looked at Lena, who was watching from the doorway of his study. "You should not see this." The old Lena would have run. The art curator, the single mother who valued peace and safety above all else, would have turned away. But the woman who had wielded a fire extinguisher on a highway, the woman whose children were now pawns in this deadly game, did not move. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I need to see." She crossed a line. She stood in the doorway and watched as Rio extracted the information he needed. There was no rage in his actions, no pleasure. It was a job. Surgical, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. When it was over, he was breathing heavily, his white shirt stained. Lena walked over, picked up a clean cloth from a nearby table, and handed it to him. Their fingers brushed. He looked at her, expecting to see disgust, fear, judgment. He saw only a profound, unsettling stillness that mirrored his own. She had not flinched. She had accepted. In that moment, she became a part of his world, not just a guest in it. That night, the tension between them became an unbearable, living thing. He found her on the balcony, a silhouette against the endless city lights. "You should hate me for what I am," he said, his voice raw. She didn't turn. "Hate is a luxury I can't afford. My daughter's lives are tied to yours now." "But no." She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I don't hate you." He closed the distance between them until only a breath of air separated them. The scent of cedar and smoke from his cologne filled her senses. "Being near you," he confessed, the words torn from him, "is the most dangerous thing I have done in 10 years. It feels like breathing again after a decade underwater." It was not a declaration of love. It was something far more potent, more dangerous. An admission of a vulnerability he could no longer deny. A confession of the life she had inadvertently breathed back into him. The Kudo clan, having failed in their ambush, changed tactics again. They decided to deliver their message directly to her. A courier delivered a large, flat box from a high-end department store. Rio's men scanned and cleared it, but the contents were not explosive. They were psychological. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a single, light pink dress, identical to the ones her daughters wore. It was slashed down the middle, the fabric ripped and stained with a dark red paint that looked sickeningly like blood. The message was unmistakable. "We can get to them. We can get to you." The war was no longer about territory or honor. It was about her family. The final confrontation had to be on his terms. Rio's plan was simple: hide Lena and the girls at a remote estate in the mountains and methodically dismantle the Kudo clan, piece by bloody piece. Lena refused. "They sent that dress to me," she said, her voice trembling with a cold fury he had never heard before. She stood before him in his study, the offending box on the desk between them. "They came for my children. This is my fight now, too." He stared at her, ready to dismiss the idea, to insist on her safety. But he saw the resolve in her eyes, the same fierce, protective fire he felt in his own gut. She was not a liability to be hidden. She was an asset. "What do you propose?" he asked, the words a surrender and an acknowledgement. "The head of the Kudo clan," she said, her mind working furiously, connecting dots from the world she knew. "His name is Kudo Kenji. I've seen his name on donor lists. He's a collector. Specifically, rare Nabeshima ware ceramics from the Edo period. There is a private auction next week. Invitation only. I can get us in." The plan was audacious. Lena would be the bait. She would use her professional credentials to get close to Kudo, to lure him to a private viewing room where Rio's men would be waiting. It was dangerous. One wrong move, one flicker of suspicion, and she would be dead. The night of the auction, the air crackled with tension. Lena wore a black, floor-length gown, elegant and severe. Her only jewelry was a single, sharp hairpin made of carved ebony, nestled in her intricate braids. Rio stood beside her for a moment before they entered. He didn't offer words of encouragement. He simply adjusted the collar of her dress, his fingers lingering for a half-second on the warm skin of her neck. A silent promise. "I will not let you fall." Inside, the gallery was a sea of quiet wealth and hushed whispers. Lena moved through it with the practiced ease of a professional, her eyes scanning, assessing. She found Kudo Kenji holding a glass of champagne, admiring a porcelain vase. He was older, with a cruel mouth and eyes that missed nothing. She played her part perfectly, engaging him in a conversation about glazing techniques, her knowledge impeccable, her manner charming. She steered him toward the private viewing room, just as planned. But as they reached the door, it swung open and two of Kudo's men stepped out, blocking the way. It was a trap within a trap. Kudo's smile was predatory. Did you really think it would be so easy? He sneered, grabbing her arm. The sounds of a struggle erupted from the main gallery floor, Rio's men engaging Kudo's. The plan had gone sideways. Kudo dragged her into the room, a knife appearing in his hand. He pressed it to her throat. Rio appeared in the doorway, his face a thundercloud of controlled fury, his own men behind him. They were at a stalemate. One more step, Ishikawa, and she dies, Kudo hissed, the blade pressing into Lena's skin. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind was icily clear. She could see her daughter's faces in her mind's eye. She would not die here. She would not be a passive victim. She looked at Kudo, her eyes meeting his in the reflection of a glass display case. You know, she said, her voice surprisingly steady, they say the shame of a warrior is not in defeat, but in fighting a battle with no honor. Kudo grunted. What do you know of honor? I know it isn't found by threatening a woman in front of your enemy, she continued, her words sharp and deliberate. It isn't found by terrorizing children. All this does is prove what he already knows. That you are a coward, afraid to face him yourself. It was a gamble, an attack on his pride. It worked. For a single, crucial second, his focus shifted, his rage peaked by her words. His grip loosened infinitesimally. That was her moment. With a speed born of pure adrenaline, she drove her ebony hairpin down into the back of his hand, burying the sharp point in the flesh and tendons. He roared in pain, the knife clattering to the floor. She had created her own opening. Rio moved like lightning, a blur of dark motion. The fight was over before Kudo's men could even react. It was decisive. Final. In the ringing silence that followed, as his men efficiently and quietly cleaned up the scene, Rio stood before her. The world outside the room ceased to exist. He didn't touch her, didn't check for injuries. His dark eyes did the work, cataloging every detail, assuring himself she was whole. He finally spoke, his voice low and raspy, heavy with the weight of a decade of solitude. My wife, he said, the words tasting foreign on his tongue, was my honor. My daughter was my heart. He took a breath, a ragged, unsteady thing. You, Lena, he said, his gaze pinning her, claiming her, are my resolve. It was not love. It was truth. A foundation laid in violence and sealed in blood. The cost was her old life, burned away in the fire of the last few weeks. She could never go back. Her daughters were now the children of a world of shadows, their futures irrevocably altered. But it was a price she had chosen to pay, a life she had chosen to fight for. Weeks later, the city felt different. Not safer, but understandable. They stood in the raked gravel of a private Zen garden at Rio's family estate outside Tokyo. The triplets, dressed in vibrant yellow, chased koi in a pond, their laughter the only sound to disturb the serene quiet. Rio watched them, and for the first time, Lena saw the coldness in his eyes recede, replaced by a soft, protective warmth that was more breathtaking than any smile. He stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't take her hand. His displays were never so simple. Instead, as the afternoon sun dipped lower, his shadow stretched out, falling over hers, enveloping it completely.
A silent, permanent shield.
A promise of darkness and of safety within it. Lena didn't move away. She leaned into it, a silent acceptance of her new reality. A choice made in the quiet of a garden, at the heart of an empire.